Now that we've gone over methods, I'm going to do some demonstrations where we're going to create methods. And we're going to start with void methods with no parameters. This is the simplest form of expression for a method. And as always, we're going to start out with hello world. In this case, I want my method to be inside a class. I could use class program, but it's time to start introducing you to having more than one class in your project. So to add a class to my project, I'm going to right-click on the project, void methods, not the solution, the project. And I'm going to select add class. And I'm going to name this class Messenger. So now I have a class Messenger. I want to add a method to this class. Now let's recall the things that are required to create a method. And I'm going to paste them in here because this was from our last lecture. The first thing we need is the access level. Who can call the method? Well, I would like the method to be able to be called from main. Main is not going to be able to see this unless we make it public. So the first statement is the access level. Public. The second thing we need is the return type. We're going to print out hello world. There is no return type. So in that case, the return type is void. I'm not going to return any data. The third thing is a name. What do we want to call this method? Well, a good name for this would be say hello. The next thing is parentheses. And in the parentheses, I would put parameters, which is data that I would pass into the method. I don't have any data to pass in this case, so I will just put empty parentheses. You must have parentheses for every method definition. Next is the code block, curly braces. What would I like to do in this method? Well, I want to print hello world. So console write line, hello world. Now I'd like to be able to call this method from the main method. So I'm going to go back to my program. The first thing I need to do is say, well, where does this method live? Well, it lives in the messenger class. If I just type say hello here, I'm going to get a red squiggly because say hello is not defined in class program. It's in the messenger class. So anytime we want to use a class's methods, we must instantiate the class. To instantiate it, we're going to assign it to a variable. And as we've learned, when we declare a variable, the first thing I need to do is say what type of variable is this? Well, it's a messenger class. And then I have to give it a name. What would I like to call this variable? I can call it anything I want. I can call it my messenger. Now I need to assign it to a new instance of the messenger class. We're going to take the class definition and create an object. We do that with the new keyword. Messenger, my messenger equals new messenger. Now this variable has the messenger class inside it. And if I want to use the say hello method, all I have to do is use the dot syntax. My method, and you see in the IntelliSense here, say hello. Always use parentheses with methods. Always end your statements with semicolons. Let's put a console.readline in at the bottom to keep it from closing. Now let's run our application. And you will see that it prints hello world. Now let's break this down. I'm going to put in a breakpoint by clicking in the gray margin. And now we're going to debug our program. When I hit start, it's going to bring up my console window and it's going to stop right here. And you'll see that the myMessenger variable is currently null. It hasn't been assigned yet. We're going to create a new messenger object and store it in that variable. Let's go to the next line. Step over. Now you see that myMessenger does have a value. It is a messenger class. And we're about to call the sayHello method. This is where instead of step over, we're going to use step into, which is F11. If I click step into, it's going to show you what the program actually does. When we say myMessenger sayHello, it's going to go into that method and it's going to run it top to bottom. Here it goes. It's going to print hello world. We see that come up to the console. And as soon as it's done with this method, it's going to go back to where it came from and continue running the program. This is the case with any method you write in .NET. As soon as you call the method, code execution will stop where you are. It will go to that method, run all the code, and then come back to where you came from. The next one is console.readline, and that ends our program when we hit enter. Now let's do something a little more complicated. Let's start a new project, and this time I'm going to create a stopwatch. We're going to call this the stopwatch demo. And what I would like to do is have the user hit the enter key, and that's going to get a timestamp of when they hit the enter key. And then when they hit the enter key a second time, I'm going to grab the timestamp at that time, subtract them, and then see how much time elapsed. This is going to give us a chance to look at more void methods, and it's also going to give me a chance to introduce you to the datetime data type, which is what .NET uses to manage dates and times. It's very useful. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a class that's going to represent a stopwatch. And I didn't mean to add that class 1. So when you do that, you got two choices. You can delete the class, or you can rename it. I'm going to right click it, and I'm going to rename it. And I'm going to change that to stopwatch. And then it'll say, you're renaming a file. Would you like to rename this file in all of the references? So anywhere where I've used class 1, it will go through and rename all of those instances for me in my code. That's really nice of them. I'm going to say, yeah, go ahead. And you'll notice that it did update the name here to the same name as the class name. Now, to have a stopwatch, I'm going to need two methods. A void method called start, which is going to start the watch. And then I want a method called stop, which is what's going to get called to stop the watch. And stop is also going to print out the elapsed time. Now, I need to keep track of when the watch was started. So for this, I have two choices. I could store it in a property, or I could store it in a private field. So the next question I ask myself is, do I want any other classes to see or manipulate the start time? And this time the answer is no. I would like the stopwatch to manage the time, and I don't want anybody else to mess with it. So I'm going to make a private variable of type datetime, and I'm going to call it start time. And when somebody calls the start method, I'm going to set the start time to a special property, datetime now. Datetime.now will return the current system date and time. Now when we stop the watch, I want to know how much time has elapsed. And this is where the datetime's partner comes in. Whenever we add or subtract dates in C#, we're going to get a special type of result back called a time span. And a time span has hours, minutes, seconds, milliseconds, properties available. So let's create a variable of type timespan. Let's name it elapsed. And let's set it equal to the current date time minus the start time that we stored before. And then let's print a message out. Console, write line. The elapsed time is, and let's do so many seconds and so many milliseconds. The data for this is going to be in our elapsed variable because that was the expression that we set. So I'm going to say elapsed.seconds and elapsed.milliseconds. Just like that. Now we need to set up our program's main method to instantiate a stopwatch and then call the start and stop methods. So let's go over to program main. Console.write. Press enter to start the timer. Console read line. At this point, I'm going to need my stopwatch. So I'm going to create a variable. It is a type of stopwatch variable. We can name this my stopwatch. Or we could just name it watch. It doesn't really matter. It's just a name. We're going to set that equal to a new stopwatch so it loads it into memory. Now I can use the methods. So I'm going to say watch start. The next thing I'm going to do, now that the watch is started, is we're going to wait for the user to press the enter key again, and that's what we're going to use as our stop time. So again, we'll wait to read in a value, and as soon as they do that, we're going to call stop. And the stop method figures out the elapsed time and prints it to the console. We're going to put a console read line in so that we don't close our program. And let's give this a try. It says press enter to start the timer. I'm going to hit enter. The start time has been set to datetime.now at this point. I'm going to let this run for a moment. And you see here, start time, start, datetime now. As soon as I hit enter, it's going to call stop, and it's going to print out how many seconds it's been. So let's go back here and hit enter. It took 18 seconds and 831 milliseconds. 2 void methods.